So the object I've brought with me today is part of a gut model. And one of the tools that we use to investigate gut bacteria and development and spread of antibiotic resistance is this model gut system. So this is a single glass vessel that we grow bacterial cultures in. The three of them together, like in this picture, represents the gut and gives us a really good simulation of the conditions in the gut and how the bacteria can interact.
My object today is a nuclear fuel pellet, uranium oxide pellet. It's not a real one, it was from a conference, but it looks like one. And if it was real, to be honest, because there's a thin piece of plastic over the top and uranium is an alpha emitter, it would be completely safe for me to hold. And related is a nuclear fuel pin. So this is what the pellets go inside in nuclear reactors. This particular one's from an advanced gas-cooled reactor, which is a UK design.
So here I have a book by Janina Bauman, and the book is called A Winter in Mourning. Now this is Janina Bauman's memoir of her time in the Warsaw Warsaw Ghetto in the 1930s and 40s in Poland. So Janina tells the story of coming of age as a young woman, against the backdrop of having to escape the Nazis on a daily basis, and being at risk of persecution constantly.
So here I've got my water bottle. If you can see, it's from COP29, Baku, Azerbaijan. This was where I was last year. So what actually happened there was it was an annual conference of parties of the United Nations Climate Change Conference. So yeah, this is the object that I want to highlight.
My object is a photograph that I took. It's called No Escape. It was photographed inside a derelict cooling tower, which was part of a coal-fired power station, which was decommissioned some years ago. You can't really tell it's a cooling tower from the photograph, but I'm actually inside the cooling tower, kind of looking up at the opening and this sort of strange doorway in it.
Yeah, so this object was created by Helene Rousseau at Bottom Up alongside a youth research board of a project called Changing the Story, which looked at youth-centred approaches to civil society building in conflict-affected contexts. It's basically a curated exhibition, a travelling exhibition created by the Youth Research Board, where they've kind of brought together the artwork from across the full project, shared it through these images, and also created audio recordings so that people can engage both visually and audibly with what they're focusing on, so issues around youth resistance, climate change, youth leadership, etc.
So when we first started talking about a polycrisis network, I couldn't really immediately see where antimicrobial resistance and how my work fits into that idea. But actually, antimicrobial resistance is, or could be described as, a crisis within itself. People talk about it as being the next big pandemic. It causes an awful lot of problems in our hospitals. It's incredibly expensive to deal with, and it means that very simple operations, very simple activities, giving birth, having simple operations can become life-threatening very quickly. And we're not able to treat them, having got so used to being able to treat them with the wonderful array of antibiotics at our disposal. The thing about antimicrobial resistance is it really is linked in to everything else that's going on around us. Climate change has a massive effect on weather, flooding, conditions in which bacteria are growing, conditions in which genes can change, conditions in which antimicrobial resistance can spread. Situations like war zones have a real impact on antimicrobial resistance rates. It's been particularly seen recently in Ukraine, where you have a number of casualties being moved through a large number of different hospitals and facilities. You really facilitate the spread of superbugs and these really antibiotic resistant organisms. So in a way, antibiotic resistance does link into such a lot of aspects of the world and different areas that we think about, that actually I found that it sits quite well inside a polycrisis network.
The reason I've got a nuclear fuel pellet is really to represent nuclear energy, which I think it highlights a polycrisis of today in energy in general, and the related geopolitical tensions that we're under, from energy security, our commitment to net zero, to our long-term commitments to the environment and geological repository of legacy nuclear waste, to AI data centers and the tech bro oligarchy idea that we're going to use nuclear to power all this new AI revolution, to Trump's tariffs, noting that a large proportion of nuclear fuel used in the US comes from Canada. So any tariffs are going to affect the nuclear industry in the US directly. So what we do in the Multiform Lab is twofold. Firstly, we're trying to work with industry on our current legacy problems so that the UK can be a leader not just in new nuclear technologies, but in cleaning up and disposing of legacy nuclear waste from many decades of bad practice. We are also looking towards new nuclear small modular reactor technologies using molten salt flow loops.
This is an incredible memoir which helps us understand a particular crisis of the actual 20th century, of the actual Warsaw Ghetto, and the Nazis' more general attack on Jewish people. But for me, what's so fascinating about this book is its entanglement with the actual lives of the Baumans in general and the thought of Zygmunt Bauman. So this book is something that the social theorist Zygmunt Bauman, her actual husband, cites as being a core influence on his theorization of the actual Holocaust. So Janina was a Holocaust survivor. Was that Zygmunt, also Polish, had escaped the actual Nazi invasion of Poland to the actual Soviet Union. So he was a soldier in actual World War II. So this memoir, this book, became a way that he could learn about the experience of this crisis in a different way, through her personal experience and through her actual lives. He felt that he had known the Holocaust as it had been something which was very very close to him, but in fact, after reading this, he decided it was hugely different to how it had been theorized in sociology in general. So for Bauman, the Holocaust had often been, as a crisis, had often been theorized as an extraordinary event. But he felt, after reading Janina's book, that it needed to be understood also as an everyday, an almost ordinary event. That its cruelty had happened through an everyday process where people had to be dehumanized before the actual victims were destroyed. So the lesson that Zygmunt Bauman takes from this memoir is that the hardest of struggles is to remain human in human conditions. And I think this is a generalizable idea that we can take to theorizing many crises. That a crisis is often something that affects our humanity and our ability to remain human in the context of an ethical obligation to others. And really, for Bauman, this becomes a moral obligation which should be guiding our social scientific analysis.
The Polycrisis network, being one of the networks that was selected by the Horizons Institute, I always, when I was reading through the webpage, I felt like the many crises, especially the financial crisis, the economic crisis, the migration crisis, the mental health crisis, all of these exacerbate itself when the climate crisis happens. So when the world is turning warmer, there are a lot of things that the states can do to raise climate action and ambition, which actually mitigates almost all the other problems too. So the Polycrisis Network, with its expertise amongst colleagues, experts, students and researchers, brings to forefront what a climate crisis can actually help with respect to especially the three objectives, which is in analyzing, documenting and exploring these socioeconomic political landscapes. So yeah, I feel this is a unique opportunity to expand the grand vision of how to mitigate the polycrisis.
The reason I selected this to be a sort of polycrisis object for this event is that I think it captures it captures something on two levels here. So you've got its kind of documentary value, that it documents a ruin that relates to several different intersecting crises. The end of sort of coal in Britain and sort of deindustrialization process to that, which was a crisis for many communities. The role of climate change within that, and looking towards a sort of post-carbon look at energy. The energy crisis that we had because of our still dependence on fossil fuels and the war in Ukraine. So there's lots of different crises that seem to come together in this one ruin as a sort of document. But I also feel like it has a symbolic value in terms of how we can feel when we're thinking about polycrisis. And there is a real sense of foreboding that I get from this particular image that I find quite powerful. We see it as a sort of a barrier that we can't kind of go past. We see the kind of almost like the crises building up in layers, so it can seem like it's something impenetrable, something that we can't circumvent. And I think it captures that feeling quite well. And also I think the door that we can see has a symbolic value, that there is a way out of this, there is a beyond, there is a future, but we can't reach it yet, or it seems unattainable. So for me, it kind of works on all those different levels. It's not a very positive image, but I do think it captures a certain feeling that I think a lot of people feel when they're confronted with all of these things that we have to try and navigate in the 21st century.
So this work directly speaks to polycrises with young people's own words and young people's own artwork, addressing issues around conflict, environmental emergencies, also kind of job crises that young people are facing. And the work of this project, as well as my work generally, examines how there's a lot of expectations on young people to address polycrises around the world. But that's kind of happening simultaneously with a lack of attention paid to young people as current political actors, and a lack of intersectional understandings of the impact of polycrises on young people and potential responses to polycrises.
This project aimed to explore the potential of photographs, photography training, and photography exhibitions for peace building between refugees and host community members in Istanbul, Turkey, Johannesburg, South Africa, and Orichanga refugee camp, Uganda. The refugees and host community youth came together to discuss, explore, and capture what a peaceful life looks like and how peace can be promoted. All displayed photos are taken by the youth in the world's largest refugee hosting 3 countries, despite the escalating anti-refugee sentiments across the world.